What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Photo Finish, Scot Radio's home for motorsports in general and NASCAR in particular. I'm your host, Ben Schneider. Had some technical difficulties with the recording last week, so we couldn't do the show. So we've got a lot to talk about and some news that actually broke. Well, I guess it didn't break today, but it was speculated and was finally confirmed today. Darrell Waltrip, who has been the main driver analyst for Fox Sports in their entire 19-year history of broadcasting NASCAR, has decided to retire from the broadcast booth at the end of the season, and this is a move that had been speculated for a couple of days, but is now finally confirmed, and it's garnered some mixed reactions. And I'll admit, personally, I think Darrell Waltrip has lost a step in recent years. I don't think he's as strong of an analyst as he was when Fox first came onto the scene in 2001. But that being said, I totally respect him. I have nothing against him personally, and I think he was obviously a very good racing driver. 84 wins and 3 championships, I think, speaks for itself. But he also has some very memorable calls and was very successful in the broadcast booth in general, particularly the first half of his career there. So I think there's this legion of fans on social media who are kind of getting on his case and saying this is something that we've wanted to see for a long time, and we're so glad we don't have to hear boogity, boogity, boogity every single weekend now on Fox. But to me, most of that isn't warranted. I think you can be critical of somebody without taking it out on them personally and without being mean in a lot of ways. And I think in Darrell's case in particular, I think it's time. You know, he's 72 years old. He's got a family. He's still healthy, and he wants to spend time with them. And I totally get that, and I think he's ready for it. And, you know, I think he has lost a step. I don't think he's as sharp as he once was. But he's done so many great things for the sport. He started Motor Racing Outreach, which has been a tremendous success. And he's been around the sport for 50 years. He's contributed so much to it. So I don't think fans are being fair to him, really, by just coming out and saying it's time for him to get out and good riddance, be gone. You know, I think as he steps away and prepares for what are going to be his final races, I think we have to respect him and really admire what he's done and what he's contributed to the sport. And it's going to be a period of transition, and in a lot of ways it's going to be weird not hearing his voice in the coming years, because, you know, Fox's booth in a lot of ways really has stood the test of time. You think when they came in with the 2001 season with Mike Joy doing the play-by-play, Larry McReynolds being the crew chief analyst, and Darrell Waltrip being the driver analyst, it was that way for 15 years. And, you know, Larry Mack kind of took a step back. He's in the studio now, and he was working as a rules analyst for a bit. You know, I personally, if we want to talk about Darrell's replacement, you know, he's somebody who I would welcome coming in to the booth again. When Jeff Gordon came in 2016, I was actually kind of surprised that it was Larry Mack that took a step out of the booth, because now we have 2 driver analysts with Gordon and Waltrip, and I don't know personally how that works as well as opposed to having both a crew chief and a driver, because I think it is important to have both perspectives. But that being said, you know, if we are going to talk about a replacement for Darrell, I personally like Ricky Craven. He has a little bit of experience in the booth with his time at ESPN, working a few nationwide races. And I like the perspective he brings to the sport. You know, I think he is a little more. Actually, as I think about it, he and Darrell Waltrip actually ran their final races together. It was the 2006 Busch Series race at Martinsville. So I guess it's not technically true, but Ricky was still a full-time driver after Darrell decided to scale back to part-time. So I guess you could say Ricky has some more modern NASCAR experience in some ways. But I don't always agree with Ricky Craven, but I like his style as an analyst, and I think he would work well in the booth. If I ruled the world, I would say you could bring Alan Bestwick back. I don't like that he's on the sidelines right now, but Mike Joy, I think, still does a pretty good job. I think he was better. I think he was even better at CBS in the 90s than he's been with Fox, but I still think he obviously knows what he's doing, and he certainly does more of an passable job as a play-by-play guy. So yeah, I think you still have him. You maybe bring Larry McReynolds back in there. You know, I think you could have a solid booth going forward in 2020 for Fox. So that's my personal opinion on what they should do. But again, I want to make sure we give Darrell his due for what he's done, because I do think it's time in many respects for him to take a step away, but he has contributed a lot to the sport, and I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that. All right, so the major talking point that I want to get to today is the new NASCAR schedules, the 2020 schedules, which have been released in March. I think normally the schedules haven't been coming out, in recent years at least, until the summertime. So I want to first off give kudos to NASCAR for getting their act together and getting it out this early. And I also want to applaud them for making changes, because I think we've wanted to see a mix-up in the schedule, for a long time now, and NASCAR's made some tweaks here and there, and there's admittedly not much they can do because they have these contracts in with the tracks, through 2020 next year, so maybe 2021 is when we see the complete shakeup. But I think NASCAR did the best that they could possibly do with the restraints that they have with the contracts in with these venues. And I think similarly, you see Charlotte bringing in the Roval last year. It's at least something different, and it's something that brings a little bit of change that the fans can appreciate. So when I look at this 2020 schedule, there are a lot of changes to go through, and we're actually going to go through each race one by one, because I tried making a whole list of notes, and there's too many notes to keep track of, so we might as well just go through the whole thing and analyze it from that perspective. So yeah, let's start the season off with Daytona. The Clash is still the same. The duels are still the same dates, Thursday nights. Daytona 500 is still the first race, and this is something that was rumored to potentially be a change that was coming. Maybe NASCAR was thinking, let's maybe run one or two races before Daytona, let's get the season going, and then have our biggest event. A lot of fans on social media weren't happy with that. I personally don't have a strong preference either way. I would prefer Daytona to kick off the season because it is the biggest race. But I think a lot of fans forget that it hasn't always been the first race of the year. Riverside kicked off the season in the 70s and early 80s. So Daytona hasn't always been the first race of the year. NASCAR survived just fine. I don't see why it necessarily has to be the first race. Again, I prefer it personally as the first race, but it's not a change that I would have looked at that and said, okay, this is absolutely horrible. And to be honest, there are some changes on the schedule where I do think that. But moving Daytona away from the first race would not have been one of them. But thankfully, or however you want to look at it, we don't have to have a debate because NASCAR hasn't made that change. So that's still going to be the same. Daytona is the first race of the year. Then we get into our first change. We no longer go to Atlanta right after Daytona. We now go straight to the West Coast swing. So Las Vegas is the second race. Auto Club in Fontana is the third race. And ISM Raceway in Phoenix is the fourth race. So the West Coast swing comes immediately after Daytona. And this is the first real positive change that I would highlight on the schedule. Atlanta Motor Speedway goes from being the second race to the fifth race. Atlanta has a very old surface, and I think when the track is hotter and slicker, it creates better racing, particularly at tracks that haven't been repaved in a while. Atlanta is one of the oldest surfaces on the schedule. So this is a change that I really like. Honestly, if you ask me, I would personally move Atlanta to April or May to make it even a little bit warmer if you could. Maybe this was as late as they could possibly go, but Sunday, March 15th, I think is you would think would be a little bit warmer than Sunday, February 23rd. So I think this is a positive change that's hopefully going to make Atlanta a better race. So we'll see. I guess the jury's still out on this one. We'll have to wait and see what the race is like next season. Now, this is the first really major negative that I can find with this schedule coming up next year. And if I were to rank it, it's the first half of what I think is the second worst change. And this is Homestead Miami Speedway, which is no longer the final race of the season. In fact, it's no longer even in the playoffs. It's now just another race. It's the sixth race of the year. It's going to be on Sunday, March 22nd. And I cannot, for the life of me, think of a good reason for doing this. Homestead, fans of NASCAR in South Florida are not going to be happy over this, because now Homestead has gone from being, aside from the crown jewel races, quite honestly, the most important date on the NASCAR schedule is the date where you crown a champion. So now, instead of being that date where we have a champion of a sport being crowned every year, now it's just another race. It's in the first half of the year. It's going to be broadcast on Fox for the first time ever. I don't see what Homestead stands to gain from this. And I guess maybe you could make the argument, well, the IndyCars used to race there in March, and that seemed to go okay. It's been a few years. It's been more than a few years since IndyCars raced there at all. But I just, from a NASCAR perspective in particular, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And not only do you lose the championship race if you're Homestead or if you're Southern Florida NASCAR fans. But if you're Florida racing fans in general, now you have two major, well, at least one, possibly two major conflicts that you're going to have to deal with as a racing fan for racing in Florida. This weekend clashes directly with the 1,000 miles of Sebring and 12 hours of Sebring doubleheader, the Super Sebring weekend, which is consisting of the World Endurance Championship for the 1,000 miles of Sebring and the 12 hours of Sebring for IMSA, which, if you ask me, you could make the argument either for Daytona or Sebring. It's one of those two races that's the biggest sports car race in all of America. So this is a really prestigious, really major event, and now it has the 1,000 miles of Sebring World Endurance Championship as a support race for it. So now those two major series are coming together on the same weekend to produce one big racing weekend. So now you've got that to compete with. And I feel like Sebring is more prestigious than just another cup race, which is now what Homestead is. But you also have, you could potentially have, I don't follow the NHRA as closely, so I don't know if their schedules are finalized yet, but I do know that the Gator Nationals are always around this time of year as well. And that's one of the NHRA's biggest racing events. And now that's in Florida as well. So you have three major racing series racing in the state of Florida on the same weekend or around the same time of year. And the only series whose event going on at that time is not a really major prestigious race is Homestead and NASCAR. And for me, I feel like that racing audience, in terms of physical attendance, could get split a bit. There's really no way around this for whatever race you're going to have at this time, but you also have the NCAA tournament to compete with now if you're Homestead, so I really don't stand to see what they gain from this, and I think this is going to be, I think attendance is going to be way down, I think the ratings are going to be way down for the Homestead race, and this is a move that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So that's my rant on Homestead going to the sixth race of the year for now, I guess, but let's keep moving through the schedule here. Texas is the same. Bristol is the same. Richmond, Talladega, Dover. These race dates don't change. Now we get to another date. Martinsville is now May 9th. And, of course, I mentioned Homestead being the sixth race of the year. Martinsville has traditionally been that sixth race of the year. So I'm fairly neutral on this. I don't have a whole lot of opinions about it. It's a Saturday night race, which is going to be interesting, I guess. There are some rumors that maybe a local late model series will come and support the Cup Series that weekend and maybe run Friday night. There's been some talk about trying to bring K&N there. I personally would love to see the modifieds come back to Martinsville, but at the moment it's a standalone event. So in terms of a date, I really don't have much to say about the date, but I would like to see another lower level series come and race that weekend in Martinsville. I don't know that having the Cup Series there by themselves is necessarily the best idea. But that's Martinsville. The All-Star race, Charlotte, Coke 600, that hasn't changed. That's still Memorial Day weekend with the All-Star race the week before it. The All-Star race is a whole nother debate. Do we keep that at Charlotte every year? Do we move it around and rotate it? For the purposes of this and the schedule, it's not going to change. Charlotte stays the same. Kansas comes after Charlotte, then Michigan, then Sonoma, then Chicago. That's pretty much all the same. Not a whole lot of change there. But then we get into a doubleheader, and I can't remember the last time NASCAR did something like this. It's an idea that IndyCar has seemed to make succeed in Detroit in June every year, so maybe this is NASCAR's inspiration for it, but it's a Saturday-Sunday doubleheader. There are two Cup Series races now on back-to-back days on the same weekend at the same track, and the track that they've chosen for this is Pocono, and this is something that, you know, I don't really know how to feel about right now. I guess if you were to choose a track for it, Pocono's two dates were fairly close. They were both in the summer, so maybe it makes sense to combine it all into one race weekend, but I don't know how this is going to work. Even at 400 miles, I know both Pocono races used to be 500 miles, and that took forever. But even at 400 miles, I feel like the Pocono races just felt long as a racing fan sitting there watching it, at least. So I don't know how fans are going to feel about having two of those on back-to-back days. I mean, this is an idea that's been floated out. If you're going to run 800 miles at Pocono, why not just do it all in one race? Make it an endurance race and see whose engine can last or whose stamina is the best to go 800 miles in a hot race car. It's an interesting idea that I think we're going to have to, again, kind of have a wait-and-see approach to this and see how it goes. There's also going to be Xfinity and Trucks and ARCA all there the same weekend, so five stock car races in just a few days. I guess if you're a racing fan in Pocono, you're certainly going to get your money's worth. But in terms of the entertainment aspect and how the quality of the races are going to be, it's something that I think is questionable. That could go either way. I've seen a lot of strong opinions on this. I personally don't have one yet because I'm going to hold judgment until I see the end result. So now, if you've been following, we get to the end of June. The next race is 4th of July weekend, and this is the worst change in the schedule, without a doubt, unequivocally, if you ask me. I think even fans who were giving this schedule an A and said that NASCAR did a fantastic job, I think even they are not very satisfied with this change. Daytona is no longer 4th of July weekend, it's Indianapolis. And Daytona gets Indianapolis' date and return, so they do a date swap. I don't understand this at all either. Like the Homestead change, I don't understand what NASCAR is thinking here. And motorsports YouTuber David Land actually brought up an interesting theory as well. He thinks they're just trying to kill the Brickyard 400 at this point, and he kind of put his chips on the table and said he thinks this could be the last Brickyard 400. There's a short track called Indianapolis Raceway Park, literally 15 or 20 minutes away from IMS. If NASCAR listens to the more short tracks cry of the fans and can work something out there, the old Busch series and Truck series used to race there many, many years ago. It could be something that gets very interesting. And you think of the Brickyard 400 and the appeal that it had in the early 90s and fans wanting to see NASCAR come to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and just how exciting it was for the first time in 1994 to see the stock cars out on the track and see names like Dale Earnhardt and Jeff Gordon, Rusty Wallace, Bill Elliott fighting for glory at IMS, getting their chance to shine there. That was a big deal, and the fans filled the seats, and it was a major event, and it's become a crown jewel event. If you talk about the four majors of NASCAR, we have Daytona, the Coke 600, the Southern 500, Darlington, and the Brickyard 400. And it's sad to see how far the race has fallen. Again, I think the 2008 race with the whole tire debacle certainly didn't help. But I think ever since then, in general, just the racing there has not been that good. And now you take it to a date in the middle of July, on 4th of July weekend, but it's going to be even hotter on July 5th. And I think of Indianapolis, too, as a city. Like, it's not a major... I mean, I guess it is if you're a racing fan in some respects, but I feel like on 4th of July weekend, there's going to be a lot of traveling, and a lot of people in the city and surrounding the city are probably going to be vacationing and going elsewhere. So I see the attendance in numbers falling even further for Indianapolis. So this is a change that I don't get at all from Indianapolis's perspective, and I don't get it all from Daytona's perspective. And we'll get to Daytona in a second here as we keep running through the schedule. But Kentucky still have their one date. That doesn't change. New Hampshire is still in the summertime. Then we have a 2-week break. Another new thing for NASCAR. I can't remember the last time we had a 2-week break in the schedule. But this is something that actually NBC kind of requested, because NBC, of course, broadcasts the second half of the NASCAR schedule. They also broadcast the Olympics. So this is the Olympic break. NASCAR won't race for 2 weeks in a row while the Tokyo 2020 Olympics are going on. And I'm personally okay with that. I remember in 2016 we had to put a couple races on CNBC and USA because all of NBC's sports channels were broadcasting Olympic events of all sorts of sports. So it's a problem. That's a problem you don't have to worry about now, I guess, with this Olympic break. But it's a new thing for NASCAR, and personally, I see where they're coming from. It's going to be interesting to see how fans react to 2 weeks off. For me personally, it's not much of a problem. Then we go to Michigan, Watkins Glen. Those dates are pretty much where they were. Dover loses its playoff date. It's now Sunday, August 23rd. I don't care much for the playoffs. If you're a regular listener to the show, you know that. I'm from Delaware. Some local fans aren't happy that Dover's lost their playoff date. I could care less. I personally don't think Dover really even needs 2 races. Again, I think the racing there has kind of been lacking in recent years. If it were up to me, I don't know if we'd go to any track twice. I feel like there are enough tracks that we need to try to expand the schedule to. And I don't know if we need to be going anywhere 2 times a year, but Dover in particular, I think could easily lose a second date, and I don't think very many people would mind. But anyway, it's no longer in the playoffs. It's now at the end of summer, and this is the second part of the Indianapolis-Daytona switch. Daytona is now the regular season finale on August 29th. And again, I obviously already mentioned why I don't think this change makes sense from Indianapolis's perspective, but from Daytona's perspective, I don't see much benefit either, because what was known as the Firecracker 400 before the Pepsi and now Coke Zero sponsorships come in, that's a major NASCAR tradition. Having it on that date, having it on that weekend. It used to be on the 4th of July. It didn't matter what day of the week the 4th of July fell on. That July 4th was always the day the Firecracker 400 was held. So that's a Daytona tradition that's now going away. I know we struggle with weather a lot of time during the summertime in Daytona and Florida as well, but when you move it even further back into August, that's even more during the prime hurricane season and bad weather season. So that's something that's, I think, NASCAR might have to deal with, if not on a yearly basis, pretty darn close to it. And finally, the placement of it being the regular season finale, being the final race before the playoffs, I don't know. I don't like the idea of having, I can't even say restrictor plate anymore because of a new package, but you know what I mean, a super speedway race being the final cutoff race to get into the playoffs. It's not something that appeals to me. With this whole win and you're in format, as long as you're in the top 30 in points, you think back to how critical drivers were of Ricky Stenhouse Jr. with how aggressive he was being at Daytona last year, and it wasn't even the final race. Unless Stenhouse gets a win at Talladega, with Roush and their speed and where they've been, I don't see Stenhouse winning a race before. I feel like Daytona or Talladega would be his best chance to win a race. So he's probably not going to have a playoff spot clinched going into this race, and this is his last chance to do it. Drivers are going to be even more aggressive, and that's probably going to lead to more big wrecks and big accidents and multi-million-dollar junkyards, and I've rambled on several times on why I don't like that, but I really don't understand why NASCAR made this change. There's got to be some reason, and I'm not in the higher ups. I don't know, but I really don't see how it makes sense. But whatever, it is what it is. Daytona's now the regular season finale. So then we get into the playoffs. Darlington is now a playoff race. It's still Labor Day weekend, but interestingly enough, it's also a throwback race. So we might have to get used to seeing playoff emojis and playoff banners on the throwback cars. So that's going to be interesting, especially for diecast collectors. People who love collecting with throwback schemes and who love, even if you're not a diecast collector, it's always fun to see the old schemes come out. But now they're going to have all the playoff stuff all over them. So that's something I guess we're just going to have to get used to. Richmond has a playoff date that hasn't changed. Bristol is now in the playoffs as a cutoff race. I think that's a good change. Again, I'm pretty indifferent when it comes to playoffs. If it were up to me, we wouldn't have them, but we do, so we have to find tracks that I think kind of suit the driver's skill more than the car. I think those are the best options for playoff races in general, but cutoff races in particular, I think need to be of that style. And Bristol being a short track, I think this is a good change. I think NASCAR made a good decision here to bring Bristol in. Vegas now has a date in the second round. Talladega is still in the second round, and the Charlotte Roval is still a cutoff race, which I didn't like it being a cutoff race last year, just because of the novelty of it. I didn't think that it needed to be that important of a race while drivers were still getting used to it, but now we're in its second year. It's not something I have a major problem with. And I do like the fact that we have a road course in the playoffs. So that's a change, or not really much of a change. It's a second round cutoff rather than the first round cutoff, but it's something that I am certainly not opposed to very much. Then Kansas comes in, and Texas and Martinsville, that's round 3. I love Martinsville being a cutoff race. I think this is a track where driver skill is more important than ever. We saw a thrilling fall race there last year, certainly a thrilling finish with Logano and Truex. So I like that change. But then we get into the final race of the year. The championship race is now at Phoenix, at ISM Raceway. And I don't really like this. For me personally, I think the racing at Phoenix and ISM even before the whole ISM revamp where they reconfigured the track, moved the start-finish line, I think ever since the first reconfiguration in 2011 when they took the infield grass away from the backstretch and put in a dogleg, restarts have been exciting. But after 5 laps when everybody gets spread out, I don't think the racing's been very good. So this is a change that I personally, I don't know. I guess it's going to be another instance of wait and see. But it's not something that I would have chosen. I get the idea that, if we're going to have a winner-takes-all format, the championship race should be rotated because obviously Kyle Larson's very good at Homestead, and a lot of people think that he'd be the champion every year if he could just make the Final Four because of how good he is at Homestead, because it's a track that fits his driving style. So if we have this format here with a winner-take-all championship race, then we probably should be rotating the championship race. But from what it sounds like, and Steve O'Donnell, I think, has alluded to this, it's not going to be that way. It looks like ISM and Phoenix are here to stay for at least a couple of years as a championship race, and we'll see how it goes. If it's a total disaster, I guess maybe they'll scramble to find something else, but it's not something that I personally am looking forward to. I think Homestead served as a better championship race option. I think Martinsville would serve as a better championship race option. I think the fans that want more short tracks, that would certainly be pleasing to them, and I don't think the racing at ISM Raceway has been that good in recent years. So that's your 2020 schedule, and we can talk a little bit about the Xfinity and Truck Series schedules as well. Those were released this week, and a lot of changes are in line with that. For example, Trucks and Xfinity will move to Homestead during March as well. It's still a companion race with the Cup Series. Only major changes that I can really see that are worth mentioning are in the Xfinity Series, Mid-Ohio moves to May. So that's an interesting date change that kind of breaks the road course summer schedule up a little bit for them. And I personally don't have any strong feelings either way when it comes to that. But essentially what's happened is Xfinity has swapped a Richmond date for a Martinsville date with the Truck Series. So the Trucks will only go to Martinsville once a year. The Xfinity Series will only go to Richmond once a year. But now, for the first time in a long time, the Xfinity Series is back in Martinsville and the Truck Series is back in Richmond. And this is another very positive change, I think. There's been a lot of drivers and fans who have wanted to see the Xfinity cars back in Martinsville for a few years now. And I know that 2006 one-off race wasn't very good. It was a caution-filled kind of debacle there, but I don't know. I feel like we only had one race there, so we didn't really, I think over to Formula One, the first race in Azerbaijan at Baku wasn't very good, and then we've had 2 absolute classics since then. So I think only giving it one shot, I'm not sure that you can. I'm not sure that that's the best approach to take. I feel like there are a lot of young drivers in the Xfinity Series who are going to be aggressive and put on a good show at Martinsville, and maybe it leads to more cautions, maybe it doesn't, but I think it's worth giving it a shot again. It's been far too long, and it's also been far too long since the Truck Series has been at Richmond, so this is a change that I find very positive, and I'm personally looking forward to seeing both of these series get back on those tracks. All right, so that's all the schedule stuff out of the way, and I was going to give a brief rant on qualifying and how much of a farce it's been in recent weeks. If you saw the Auto Club Speedway qualifying, nobody made it to the line in the third round, so Austin Dillon was basically gifted the pole based on his second round speeds. There's been a lot of talk about how to fix qualifying and drivers, not wanting to go out right away because now you can draft, and nobody wants to be that first car and not have the opportunity to draft because everybody wants to go for the pole. Obviously, you want the fastest qualifying time. You're not going to get that if you're out leading that pack. I know NASCAR said they don't want to really admit that they're wrong and go back to single car qualifying, but of all this talk about how to fix it, I really don't see any other way. I've talked about single car qualifying as a preference of mine, even before this new package, before this year, because I think it gives every driver, their moment in the spotlight, and not only every driver, but every team and their sponsors as well. It becomes even harder for small teams to be appealing to potential sponsors when they're not getting any TV time. So you give them that TV time during qualifying, I think that certainly helps them out. But when we have group qualifying, they're among the group again. It takes that opportunity away from them. So it's not something that I personally enjoy. And I think a lot of fans, with this new package in particular, I think this was the sentiment even before this year, but they want to see single car qualifying come back. And you can certainly count me among that group. I think it's the only way to fix what we've seen in recent weeks, and it's certainly a problem, and it's a problem that needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. So that's my thoughts on qualifying. Let's get into the winners of the races since we've been on the air. So in the K&N West Series, I don't know how much I really talked about this, but Hailie Deegan got her second career win at the Las Vegas Motor Speedway dirt track. I think I kind of failed to mention that the last time I was on here. And it was a very similar move that won her first race. She closed in on Jagger Jones in the final laps. Jagger was kind of getting held up by lap traffic, but it was another last lap pass going into turn one, and Hailie Deegan is now a two-time K&N West winner, and she's only led one lap in each of those races. So I'm certainly not taking anything away from her. 2 wins are 2 wins. But sooner or later, I would like to see her start on pole, lead, if not every lap, certainly the most laps, and go ahead, close the deal, and win the race. I think she's shown that she can be aggressive. She's shown speed over a single lap. She's won a few poles now, but she's still only led 50 laps in her K&N career. So it's something that I think she has to sooner or later learn how to do is go out and just dominate and put a full race together. Because everybody's talking about Hailie as being this future, superstar and Cup race winner, and I feel like you can't really say that at the K&N level about anybody. I think back to Dylan Kwasniewski being a 2-time K&N champion in 2012 and 2013, and he got to the Xfinity Series in 2014, just stalled out completely, and he's now working in real estate. This was a guy that was dominating, and when he moved up, he just lost a step, and that was it. His career completely stalled out. So you could maybe argue he moved up too quickly, but future success is not, set in stone either way if you go out and win a K&N championship or if you go out and only win a handful of races. I think we need to wait to see to proclaim her a future Cup winner or not until she moves up eventually, even as far as the Cup Series. It's far too soon to be saying that about her. That being said, that's a little long-winded in all seriousness. Congratulations to her. And Trevor Huddleston got the win this past weekend at Irwindale, which is his home track. It's also his first career win. His family's home track. It was a very special moment for him and a really thrilling finish. He actually crashed the car going into turn one after crossing the finish line. So congratulations to him. And K&N West, I have to say, is probably the best series in NASCAR right now to be watching as a fan, because we've seen a lot of really good storylines and really, really exciting finishes to start this year. So moving into the National Series now, don't really have a whole lot to say about Trucks and Xfinity because Kyle Busch has won everything since we've been on the air. So he's now at 204 combined NASCAR wins. I really have nothing more to say about either of those series. It's an achievement for Kyle. I don't hate him for doing it. I hate NASCAR for letting him do it. And yeah, I really have nothing more to say about it. I want to get straight into the Cup Series here. So Brad Keselowski won at Martinsville. He didn't just win at Martinsville. He flat out dominated at Martinsville. He led 446 of the 500 laps and held off Chase Elliott for the win late. But Keselowski, he really put in just a dominating performance. There's really nothing more you can say about it. I guess it wasn't as good of a race, certainly by Martinsville standards, but that's what happens sometimes. Sometimes a driver just cracks the code for that race weekend, and they're untouchable, and that was Keselowski at Martinsville. And when we got to Texas, Denny Hamlin got his second win of the year. So now through 7 races, Denny Hamlin's already won twice, which is 2 more times than he won in all of 2018. So that 11 team certainly seems like they've found whatever step they lost last year. And another interesting thing of note is that only 2 teams have won this season. It's been all Gibbs and all Penske all the time. So, we talked about the big 3 in terms of drivers last year. I think it's certainly shaping up to be the big 2 with Gibbs and Penske this season. Gibbs certainly looked like they're carrying the Toyota banner very, very well. And Penske looked to be carrying the Ford banner. Even Stewart-Haas, I think, is a little bit behind. Roush has been falling off for years now, I think, but Stewart-Haas seemed to be a little bit behind where Penske have set the bar this season. So those 2 teams are certainly, and all their drivers as well, are going to be ones to watch as we head through the season for sure. All right, so moving into some IndyCar coverage now. It was announced today that Dale Earnhardt Jr. is joining NBC's stacked coverage for the Indy 500. So now we have Danica Patrick coming to Indianapolis, and Dale Earnhardt Jr. is going to be joining the party as well. And it's garnered some mixed reactions, just like the Waltrip news has. But I personally, I want to assure the fans that they're thinking back to Rusty Wallace calling the Indy 500 in 2006 and 2007. Dale's not going to be in the booth. He's not an open wheel guy. He's a former NASCAR driver, but he's somebody who has a name. It is very recognizable, and it's like Danica. It's a big name that's going to bring in some eyeballs, I think. I think as long as you use him well, maybe, I don't know if they're going to have a Peacock pit box or something like that, or a studio or something. I don't know what their exact plans are for him yet, but I know it's not going to be in the booth. You're going to have Diffie, Townsend Bell, and Paul Tracy in the booth, just like any other IndyCar race on NBC. So it's a strong move by NBC. I think it really, again, shows their commitment, shows that they're going all in. And as long as they use him well, I think this is going to be a positive for not only NBC but for the fans, because I do think Dale Jr. has done a good job as an analyst. As long as he does his homework going into the 500, and again, NBC put him in the right position, I think it's going to work out. All right, so the IndyCar Classic at Circuit of the Americas, that was the name of the race, the IndyCar Classic, which I think COTA might have been a little ambitious when coming up with a name for their race. So this race had a lot of hype to live up to, but it certainly did, because Colton Herta, just 18 years old, became the youngest winner in IndyCar Series history. He's the first IndyCar Series winner born in the 2000s, which certainly makes me feel a little old, but it was a great day for him and the whole Harding-Steinbrenner racing team. And certainly you would think a sign of things to come for Colton Herta in his career, but I can't help but think back to the last 2 teenagers to win IndyCar races. And of course, I'm talking about, ironically, 2 other second-generation drivers, or at least drivers that have come from racing families before them, and that's Marco Andretti and Graham Rahal. And Marco in particular, I think, he got his win at Sonoma in 2006, of course, narrowly missed out on winning the Indy 500 that year, but he got a second win at Iowa in 2011, and that's pretty much it. And you look at his results, especially in recent years, and how far behind his teammates have been. He's a good guy. I have nothing against him personally, but I think it's kind of hard to deny that his last name is really the main reason he's been at Andretti his entire career. He just has not had the pace of his teammates or the star power of his grandfather, Mario, or his father, Michael. And when I look at Graham Rahal, not as much in terms of mediocrity, but he won at St. Petersburg in 2008 as a teenager, and then we had to wait all the way until Fontana in 2015 for him to get his second win. So I certainly hope that doesn't happen to Colton Herta, and I think he's a very good young driver who has a lot of potential, but it is something to keep in mind. We've seen Colton can do it. Now let's see him back it up and win a few more. But certainly my congratulations to him. It was really a thrilling race. I had my doubts. I felt like there were so many other good tracks that IndyCar could go to instead of Circuit of the Americas that they hadn't been to in a while, but I'm willing to admit that I was wrong. This race certainly lived up to the hype. Will Power started on pole position, and he dominated early, pretty much led almost all of the first 45 laps or so. But he got caught out with a poorly timed caution for Felix Rosenqvist, who crashed on his way into pit road. And because of the way the running order and pit stops were cycling through, it meant that Power was going to be restarting in the middle of the field. But he didn't even get the chance to do that because when he came down pit road, the drive shaft broke, and that was pretty much the end of his race. So that left Colton Herta in prime position to go ahead and drive away. He got a great restart and ended up winning the race. So again, congratulations to him, and congratulations to Circuit of the Americas because it was certainly a good show, and they put on a fantastic race. They really did put on an IndyCar Classic. It was a great race to watch, and I'm certainly looking forward to next year already. All right, so that's, I think, going to wrap it up for this week's edition of the Photo Finish. Next week, we'll get caught up on Formula One. The Bahrain Grand Prix was, of course, last weekend, and I'm hoping to have one of my teammates on as a guest as well, so that we can talk about the race together and debrief. Dylan Burge is a bit of a new Formula One fan. He saw the new Netflix series and has kind of been talking to me about it recently, and I've invited him on, so hopefully he's going to be able to come on and talk about it. And yeah, NASCAR's at Bristol this weekend, so I'm sure we're going to have plenty to talk about there as well. So for now, I'm Ben Schneider. We'll see you in the next episode. Have a good night, everyone.